Welcome to the debate. Think of a global security architecture like the operating system of a highly complex computer network.
Right, the base layer.
Exactly. And for nearly 80 years, the United States military has functioned as that base operating system for European defense. It silently runs the critical background processes, the heavy logistical transport, the instantaneous satellite intelligence fusion, deep munitions stockpiles, and of course,
The nuclear umbrella.
precisely. Now, European nations have certainly built incredibly sophisticated military applications on top of it, but those regional applications, they still fundamentally require that American operating system to boot up, network together, and function securely under pressure.
But what happens when the primary developer of that operating system explicitly signals they are winding down support? You don't just stop using computers. You are forced to write a new independent operating system.
Yes.
And while the beta testing phase might be turbulent, the end result is a proprietary system you actually control.
And that is exactly the transition we are scrutinizing today. Specifically, welcome to our Friday debate for May 22nd, 2026. This broadcast is made possible by our sponsor, ProWave AI.
And we should note right at the top that the objective analysis you'll be hearing today is generated by Stylo News. That's an AI-powered news application.
Right.
And Stylo News is actually the consumer-facing version of Stylo Intel Ops, which is a highly sophisticated software platform designed specifically for enterprise operations, so across government, military, and international business.
It is. And by utilizing this tool's data, we're giving our listeners unique access to the exact same grade of analytical synthesis designed to support global decision makers. So today, we are examining the emergence of the new European defense order. As NATO enters a critical transitional phase, marked most definitively by the confirmed United States withdrawal of 5,000 troops from Germany by late 2026, we are assessing the structural future of Europe's military strategy.
It's a pivotal moment.
Indeed. The central strategic question we must answer is this. Does NATO 3.0 require an entrenched American military presence and its strategic enablers to defend Europe against Russian hybrid and conventional threats, or can Europe successfully establish true strategic autonomy and defend itself without the United States?
While I'll be representing the perspective that Europe is actively and successfully building its own independent war economy. By internalizing the cost of their own security, European nations are proving they can eventually secure their borders without relying on an increasingly unpredictable political administration in Washington.
And I will be representing the position that the United States remains an indispensable, really a load-bearing pillar of European security. When we look at the pure mechanics of modern warfare, Europe currently lacks the immediate structural, intelligence, and logistical capacity to deter Russian aggression on its own.
So let's look at the facts on the ground.
Right, let's ground this in the immediate threat environment. Over the 14th and 15th of May, Russia launched a massive coordinated barrage against Ukraine, utilizing over 1,500 drones and missiles.
A staggering volume.
Sophistication. They deployed newly manufactured K-101 cruise missiles, which are designed with low observable, radar-evading characteristics, alongside complex aeroballistic munitions.
And that specific strike wave extended deeply into western Ukraine, which of course triggered immediate Polish aircraft scrambles due to the proximity to NATO borders.
Precisely. It caused 24 fatalities in Kyiv, but strategically, it demonstrated a multi-wave saturation tactic. To intercept an attack of that density, you require fully integrated air dominance. You need tracking radars talking instantaneously to interceptor batteries across national borders. While European defense spending is factually rising, Europe still suffers from critical operational vulnerabilities. They lack the depth in ammunition stocks, they lack unified satellite intelligence networks, and crucially, 75% of recent EU arms purchases still originate from the United States.
That is a factual statistic, yes.
Without American Patriot batteries and the U.S. data link backbone, the capacity to intercept a saturation attack at scale simply does not exist in Europe today.
I come at it from a different way. Your assessment of the immediate tactical environment is highly accurate, but it focuses entirely on today's inventory, while missing the broader strategic trajectory. The announced U.S. withdrawal of 5,000 troops from Germany isn't just a political talking point. It's a clear, undeniable forcing function.
A catalyst, essentially.
Exactly. Europe realizes it can no longer outsource its security to a transactional administration in Washington. And we are witnessing rapid, historic structural changes because of it. Consider Germany. Historically, post-war Germany has been deeply hesitant to militarize.
Of course.
Now, Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has outlined a massive doctrinal shift to build a 460,000-troop army, aiming to become Europe's strongest conventional military by 2039.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. That is a significant policy reversal, certainly, but 2039 is more than a decade away.
Well, it takes time to reverse decades of disarmament, but it isn't just Germany. France is actively expanding its nuclear deterrent under its forward deterrence policy, negotiating to extend that umbrella over its European partners.
Right.
And Poland just secured a landmark €44 billion loan from the EU's SAFE program for rapid, comprehensive military modernization. They are buying tanks, artillery, and advanced aircraft at an unprecedented rate. We're looking at a continent-wide paradigm shift. These aren't just press releases, they are irreversible policy shifts, mapping out a future where European strategic autonomy replaces reliance on Washington.
That €44 billion target is an impressive financial blueprint, but let's talk about how that translates to the battlefield, because setting a 5% GDP target for 2035 or aiming to build a 460,000-troop army by 2039 is the geopolitical equivalent of drawing up beautiful, state-of-the-art blueprints for a new firehouse while your neighborhood is already experiencing a wave of arson.
That's a vivid analogy.
The Russian threat is not waiting for 2039. The Stylo Intel Ops dashboard estimates from mid-May indicate a highly elevated risk of coercive sub-threshold hybrid incidents right now.
Sub-threshold, meaning actions that fall just below the level that would trigger a formal Article 5 declaration of war.
Exactly. Things like severe GPS jamming, disrupting commercial flights in the Baltic Sea, or deniable drone incursions. We recently saw a military drone crash into a Latvian oil facility, an incident severe enough that it triggered the resignation of the Latvian government.
It did.
Long-term procurement goals do not solve the immediate gap in ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. If a coordinated drone swarm approaches the Suwalki corridor, that narrow critical 40-mile choke point between Poland and Lithuania, well, European nations require instantaneous attribution.
They need data.
They need space-based early warning networks that detect heat signatures in milliseconds and feed that data directly to ground defense systems. Only the US currently provides that unified satellite constellation. Europe is building the firehouse, but they are still completely dependent on borrowing American hoses to put out today's fires.
I'd argue a war economy isn't a firehouse. It's a blast furnace. It takes immense energy and time to heat up, but once it reaches optimal temperature, it melts down legacy obstacles. You mentioned the intelligence gap, but Europe is aggressively closing it through new doctrines.
In what timeline, though?
The European Union has laid out a €950 billion military buildup planned over the next 4 years. And more importantly, they are fundamentally changing how they procure technology. We are seeing joint drone production initiatives with Ukraine that are rapidly scaling low-cost attritable systems.
By attributable, you mean cheap, mass-produced, unmanned systems that are designed to be lost in combat.
Precisely. Instead of spending 10 years and billions of euros developing one perfect fighter jet, they are using the current conflict as a live catalyst to mass-produce autonomous systems that can overwhelm expensive legacy air defenses. They are adapting to the asymmetric threat.
Right.
Furthermore, the operational structure of how Europe intends to fight is evolving. The traditional 32-member NATO framework, which requires absolute political consensus and relies heavily on American leadership, is proving too cumbersome for this new reality.
Are you referring to the alternative continental command structures currently being debated in Berlin?
Yes, let's look at former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen's recent proposal. He's actively advocating for a new coalition of the willing. Major players on the continent, Germany, Poland, and potentially Ukraine, were exploring alternative defense frameworks.
Bypassing the traditional consensus model?
Exactly. They want the ability to bypass the political gridlock of traditional NATO structures. This is a highly pragmatic response. When U.S. leaders openly question Article 5 commitments and threaten further troop withdrawals from places like Italy and Spain, frontline European states simply can't afford to wait on a transactional Washington. A coalition of highly motivated, geographically proximate states can deploy forces faster and with more resolve.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because that logic seriously underestimates the internal fragmentation within Europe itself. A coalition of the willing sounds incredibly agile in a policy briefing, but modern high-intensity defense relies on centralized command, standardized logistics, and absolute interoperability.
Which they are working toward.
But if Poland uses one data link system and Germany uses another, they cannot share targeting data in real time. While leaders like Pedro Sanchez in Spain and Giorgia Meloni in Italy publicly advocate for strategic autonomy, the reality is that European nations remain fiercely protective of their domestic defense industries. They are highly reluctant to actually cede national military competencies to a centralized EU command.
But the sheer scale of the 44 billion euros SAFE program loan to Poland demonstrates that when the threat is proximate, the EU can mobilize massive, centralized financial resources to override that historical protectionism.
Financial resources don't automatically forge structural military cohesion. Let's look at how the adversary calculates this, because deterrence is fundamentally about the adversary's perception of your unity.
Fair point.
Russian military analysts, such as Alexander Stepanov, are publicly boasting right now that systems like the RS-28 Sarmat and the new Rs-Nok ballistic missiles can neutralize European NATO infrastructure. Whether we view that as factual capability or purely strategic propaganda, it reveals Moscow's calculus.
How so?
When they look at a fragmented European coalition operating without the United States' strategic nuclear umbrella and logistical backbone, they do not see true deterrence. They see a patchwork of nations with different foreign policies, presenting an opportunity to divide, pressure, and exploit seams in the alliance. The U.S. presence is the only undisputed, cohesive force that definitively alters that calculus.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that your premise assumes the primary deterrence is purely military stockpiles or political treaties? Modern deterrence is increasingly derived from industrial capacity and economic momentum.
Go on.
If you look at the data Stylo News is pulling right now, tracking real-time social media sentiment on platforms like XPublic and investor sentiment is overwhelmingly bullish on Europe's defense industry. We're seeing over 70% positive sentiment across targeted financial and defense sectors.
Which is driven almost entirely by the venture capital surge in the defense tech sector, correct?
It is, and that is a massive structural shift. There is historic excitement around VC investments in military tech startups across Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw, but it's not just software. We are seeing massive physical consolidations. Look at the 690 million euro Rheinmetall ecosystem deals.
Let's unpack the Rheinmetall ecosystem for a moment, because it's central to your point.
Gladly. Rheinmetall isn't just buying artillery shells. They are vertically integrating the entire supply chain on the European continent. They are securing the chemical plants that make the propellants, the factories that forge the steel casings, and the tech firms that build the targeting logic boards.
Right, bringing it all in-house, geographically speaking.
Exactly. We're also seeing strategic defense agreements between Belgium and Turkey, integrating advanced manufacturing across borders. This economic momentum proves the private sector is actively building the European war economy. Investors are quite literally pricing in a future where European defense contractors replace American primes on the continent. They are financing the scaling of AI-enabled targeting systems and materials innovation. This isn't slow-moving government bureaucracy. This is the free market aggressively responding to a permanent geopolitical shift.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. The technological innovation in the European private sector is genuinely impressive, and venture capital enthusiasm is certainly a leading indicator of market opportunity. But positive sentiment on social media doesn't alter the brutal math discussed by defense logisticians.
The logistics are always the hardest part.
They are, yes. On paper, Europe collectively outspends its adversaries.
But a startup in Munich developing brilliant AI targeting software, while valuable, does not instantly manifest as a fully integrated operational Patriot missile battery deployed on the Polish border.
But it does manifest as the integration of advanced data fusion across Nordic counter-drone platforms. The technology cycle in the private sector is moving much faster than the legacy state procurement cycles you're referencing.
Even acknowledging the accelerated tech cycle, there are physical bottlenecks in high-intensity manufacturing that cannot be bypassed by software algorithms. We're talking about heavy metallurgy, the production of solid rocket propellants, which require specific chemical supply chains like nitric acid and specialized cotton linters that Europe currently struggles to source domestically.
That's true.
The U.S. industrial base, despite its own widely acknowledged challenges, remains the only current mechanism capable of sustaining the sheer volume of high-intensity conflict supplies necessary for a protracted engagement.
For now.
Yes, for now. But today is when the threat exists. The U.S. provides the strategic lift, the massive C-17 transport aircraft required to move armor across continents in hours. It provides the space-based early warning networks and the deep, pre-positioned munitions magazines that make the European defense posture credible this very morning. Taking pride in the growth of the European defense tech sector is justified, but conflating that private sector momentum with the immediate operational replacement of the U.S. military-industrial complex is, well, a dangerous strategic miscalculation.
I wouldn't frame it as a miscalculation. I see it as a necessary, albeit painful, transition. The partial withdrawal of American troops and the shifting priorities in Washington act as the ultimate catalyst. If the U.S. maintained its historical, heavy footprint posture indefinitely, Europe would simply never undertake the politically expensive, highly unpopular process of integrating its defense markets.
Necessity forces innovation.
Precisely. The growing pains are very real, and the immediate vulnerabilities you've outlined are factual. But the capital markets, the technological sector, and finally the political class are aligning. Europe is internalizing the cost of its own defense. While the transition away from the American operating system will undoubtedly be turbulent, the endpoint is a more balanced, resilient global security architecture, where Europe stands as a self-sustaining pillar, not a dependent client state.
Well, as we synthesize the parameters of our debate today, the facts present a highly complex, rapidly shifting landscape. The transition toward European militarization is measurable and highly significant. Defense budgets across the continent are rising substantially, and industrial capacities, from artillery production to advanced software integration, are being re-engineered from the ground up.
That's a profound change.
It is. However, looking strictly at the data, the immediate tactical realities of the Russian hybrid threat necessitate continued U.S. strategic support. The sophisticated drone saturation tactics, the cyber incursions, and the genuine potential for conventional spillover require capabilities Europe does not yet possess at scale. NATO 3.0 in the near to medium term still fundamentally requires the structural, intelligence, and logistical load-bearing capacity of the United States to maintain a credible deterrent posture.
And my conclusion, drawn from the exact same empirical baseline, is that the irreversible policy shifts in Germany, France, and Poland, coupled with massive venture capital and state investment, clearly map out a different long-term reality. The geopolitical unreliability of Washington has catalyzed a permanent structural change across the Atlantic. We are witnessing the very real foundation of a European strategic autonomy that will eventually and necessarily replace reliance on the United States. Europe is proving block by block that it has the economic engine and the technological will to secure its own borders.
We can certainly both agree that the upcoming July 2026 NATO Summit in Ankara will serve as a critical inflection point for these geopolitical realignments.
Absolutely. The structural decisions made by member states at that specific summit will likely set the definitive, binding course for the alliance's future, particularly regarding command integration and burden-sharing mechanisms.
Well, we want to shift our tone here for a moment and warmly thank all of you for taking the time to join us for this Friday debate. We know these are complex, multifaceted issues, and we hope this deep dive has provided you with a clearer, more nuanced understanding of the forces actively shaping our global security environment.
We also want to take a moment to remind you about the platform that made today's analysis possible. Stylo News is available right now as both a mobile app and a desktop computer application. It is a remarkably powerful tool that individuals can download and fully customize to create their own personal intelligence-style briefs.
It really is.
It draws continuously from hundreds of traditional, verified news sources, as well as tracking real-time sentiment from platforms like X.
It represents a true paradigm shift in how we process information, allowing you to track patterns of global importance and read the geopolitical tea leaves exactly like we did today. If you want AI-powered, enterprise-grade news on demand, we highly encourage you to subscribe at www.stylonews.com.
And please make sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms. Most importantly, feel free to submit your requests for future topics. We rely heavily on your curiosity and your feedback to guide our geopolitical analysis.
At the beginning of our broadcast, we spoke about the intricate operating system of a computer network. As Europe begins to write its own code, compile its own software, and build its own firewalls, the entire world is watching the deployment. The true test of any security system, after all, isn't how sleek the interface looks in a presentation. It's whether the system holds firm when a malicious threat tries to breach the network. Thank you for listening.